Yes. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tabor Talk. So, I am going to play an interview from Pod Save the World with Ben Rhodes and a trauma surgeon in Gaza. His name is Farazi Sidwa, I believe. I think that's correct. So, everyone should see this. What is happening in Gaza is beyond words, appalling and sickening. I can't even watch this, and I'll talk some more.
Dr. Feroz Sidwa to the podcast. He's a trauma surgeon based in Stockton, California. He's volunteered in Gaza twice, most recently this past March at the Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis. He's also volunteered in Ukraine, Haiti, Zimbabwe, and Burkina Faso. Feroz, thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
All right, so I want to get to asking you to kind of compare the two times you've been in Gaza. But let's just start at the beginning. How does a trauma surgeon from California end up in European hospital in Khan Yunis?
Yeah. So the first time, the humanitarian sphere is like completely disjointed, totally disorganized, as you can imagine. But I got an email from the Society of Critical Care Medicine, which is just a professional society that I'm part of, and letting people know that if you want to volunteer in Israel after the October 7th attacks, this is how you can do it. And if you want to volunteer in Gaza, this is how you can do it. And that call for volunteers, the call for volunteers was to work with the WHO in Gaza, because you can't really work with the Ministry of Health directly because you'll be you'll be considered working with a terrorist organization. So that call went out through the Palestinian American Medical Association. So I contacted them, and they sent us over. And at that time we went to Cairo. We could take a whole bunch of supplies with us and stuff because the Rafah gate was still open, but now obviously not.
So obviously we want to focus on your experience there. And I guess it is worth contrasting here. So how would you compare the two different times you spent there? I assume that, just as someone who's following this, what was already not a significant amount of healthcare infrastructure has basically been destroyed. But what did you see differently the last time you were there from the first time?
So the first time I went, I was at European on the eastern edge of Khan Yunis, and at that time, European Hospital, like most of the hospitals in Gaza, was a displaced persons camp. So there were 10 to 15,000 people sheltering on the grounds of the hospital, but then also within the hospital, like lining the corridors of the hospital. There were families living in tents, because it's better to live inside than outside, have some electricity, something like that. So like women were cooking pita bread in the emergency room during mass casualty events. Women, there were people trying to drain out, canned vegetables in the ICU sink. Like it was a total disaster. There was no way for a hospital to function this way. And so that is the fact that wasn't going on when I went back this time. I entered Gaza this time on March 6th and I left on April 1st, if I remember right. And so when I went back, every hospital in Gaza has been forcibly emptied at some point. And when people have been allowed to come back in, the administration and the Ministry of Health have kind of decided together that we're not going to let Palestinians camp in the hospital anymore. It's not, they don't have anywhere to go, but at the same time, there's just no way for them to, the hospital can't function like that. Even though it's sheltering people, it's not being a hospital at that point. So Nasser, I went back to Nasser Medical Complex, which is on the other side of Khan Yunis, and the thing that was better was that Khan Yunis, or that Nasser was not a DP camp, so the hospital could actually function, but everything else was worse. I arrived during the ceasefire. March 6th to April 18th was still ceasefire time, and we were seeing trauma cases for sure, like one or two people shot every day. Sometimes it was from Israel, or Israeli forces. Sometimes it was actually because there was a dispute going on between two families in Khan Yunis, and the Hamas government couldn't suppress it like they normally would. But the other types of trauma cases we were seeing were people who were, there was no widespread bombing going on at this point. So the other type of trauma we would see was from bombings that had happened like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And people's homes would collapse on them when they tried to go back in. The main thing was actually to retrieve their loved ones' bodies, but also like to try and get their possessions out. If they had cash that had been in the building when it had been destroyed, things like that. And yeah, so but unfortunately, the destruction of Gaza was far more severe. When I was there the first time, the Battle of Khan Yunis was still going on. Like Israeli troops were basically moving from north to south, and the hospital was constantly shaking. Even though a European hospital is on the outskirts of Khan Yunis, the hospital was just literally swaying back and forth almost the entire time. There were windows broken on the third floor. One of the guys I went there with, Mark Perlmutter, he was thrown into a wall by an explosion, broke one of his teeth. So it was close up. When I got back to Nasser, or when I went to Nasser from the 2nd to the 18th, there was no bombing at all. So it was, there was shooting, but not bombing. So it was relatively quiet. But then after the 18th, when, at 2:30 in the morning about the Israelis resumed the really widespread bombing of Gaza, mostly to kill Hamas's political leadership, they said. And it was, that was the start of the biggest mass casualty event I've ever seen in my life. Like I was a resident during the Boston Marathon bombing, and it doesn't even, that was like an order of magnitude off of what we saw on the 18th, and then not just the 18th, but going forward as well.
And who, like, how many people that you're treating are children, are civilians? I mean, how, take us inside like the kind of, the pace and the kind of patients you're seeing, and the kind of injuries you're seeing.
So at Nasser when I went this time, everything was after March 18th. Everything was explosions. There were, I'm trying to think, actually the only shootings that I saw after March 18th that I can remember off the top of my head were from a helicopter gunship. Not like not small arms or even medium arms, but really big weapons. And of course all those people died. But the types of injuries that we were seeing were mostly explosive and shrapnel injuries. Now, if a bomb just shreds someone to pieces, they're dead. There's nothing we can really do about it. But the types of injuries we can do something about are injuries, basically, for shrapnel injuries from the neck down to the pelvis, and then the arms and legs, obviously. But those usually are less life threatening, just because you can amputate someone's arm if you need to, or their leg. In terms of children. Because I'm trained in trauma surgery, which means my job is mostly to stop people from bleeding to death. So because of that, during mass casualty events, I go to what's called the red zone, like the red triage area, where the most severe patients are coming. And I would say most of those patients were small kids, not like 17 and a half year olds, but like, preteen children, like, 12 and under. That's not because most of the injuries are actually in children, but most of the severe injuries seem to be in children, if that makes any sense. And it kind of tracks because, if you expose you or me to a bomb versus a 5-year-old, the 5-year-old's going to be much more seriously injured. We were dealing with a lot of injured children, unfortunately.
But you wrote a piece for the Times last fall, in which you talked about surveying 65 healthcare workers like yourself. And of them, 44 said they, quote, saw multiple cases of preteen children who'd been shot in the head or chest. That should be jarring to people. How are these children being shot like this?
Yeah, so this was, all of this, so that survey was done mostly of people who were in Gaza during the ground invasion. When, in other words, when there were Israeli troops in the vicinity of the hospitals that they were working in, and I think that's just what explains it. I mean, there are it's unfortunate, but every society's army has people who are sadistic or cruel, and will do things like that, like shoot a child in the head. But the large majority of us did regularly see children shot in the head or the chest on a regular basis. Like for me, I was there. Like I said, March 25th to April 8th of that year. And every day, like on average, I saw one kid shot in the head every day. And that's despite the fact that I'm not even the person they call for this. Like I'm not a neurosurgeon, right? So it was just I happened to be there. So I'm sure there were many more. But what explains it, it's conjecture on my part. So I don't know exactly what explains it. But I think with the October 7th attacks were a shocking atrocity to Israelis especially. And there was also a lot of atrocity propaganda that happened afterwards. You had the beheaded babies,
Yeah.
the widespread rape, and these kinds of things that there isn't any evidence for. So when you've got an army that feels like it's fighting for its national survival against people who are constantly being called animals and vermin and other such things, and furthermore, there's a humongous power disparity. Like it's like, like the Palestinians have basically very, very, very little means of self-defense. Less than one Israeli soldier has been killed per day in Gaza since the invasion started, and so I think I think Israeli soldiers just have the opportunity to do these things if they want to, and it's kind of clear that the Israeli army is not going to stop them from doing it.
To just stay with the circumstances for the Palestinians, there's a lot of focus on. Well, actually, I have a couple questions, but
Yeah.
I mean, a short one is the death count seems low to me, and most people that have evaluated this think it's. I mean, what is your assessment? I know I'm not asking you to give me a count, but is there? How do you even keep track of the number of people who are being killed?
Yeah, so this is important for people to understand. In the media, it's often said the Hamas-run Ministry of Health says this many people have been killed, but it doesn't distinguish between combatants and civilians. That's all accurate, but it's a little bit misleading. Firstly, I don't know. I literally don't know anyone, with one exception. I don't know anyone who has treated a combatant in Gaza. Everyone I treated, in both the first time and the second time I was there, everyone came in with their family. And, you can say whatever you want about Hamas. No one thinks they're dragging their wives out to the battlefield.
Yeah.
That's silly. So I suspect that combatants are not even really counted in that group. But it's basically 100% civilian casualty that we're seeing. I'm sure there's one fighter somewhere in there that we just can't see, but that's not the common situation. There is actual data on this question of like just sticking with violent deaths. Forget the starvation and the disease and the other things, but just sticking with violent deaths. There was a study that was just done in the Lancet, which is a major British medical journal, and what they showed. So they got the Ministry of Health's entire database, not the aggregate numbers, but literally line by line, person by person data, and they compared that to a survey that had been done and social media postings, and they kind of did what Air Wars does, where they needed 2 points to verify that somebody had been killed, like a social media posting and a survey, or a social media posting and the Ministry of Health data, something like that, and they found that even just sticking to violent deaths, the Ministry of Health was undercounting publicly verifiable deaths by 40%. So there's that aspect of it. On top of that, there's the major question of what's broadly called famine, but it's usually people think of famine as meaning there isn't enough food, right? But famine really encompasses more than that. It encompasses displacement, lack of water, like drinking water, lack of sanitation and hygiene infrastructure, lack of food, obviously, and lack of health care as well. And these are all things that are under direct and sustained attack during this assault.
At Granger, we're for the ones who pay attention.
So nobody knows what the death count is because people aren't allowed to study it. It's important for people to understand that with $50,000 and about 3 weeks, we could answer that question. Not me, but a public health researcher.
And the U.S. government could answer that question.
It probably could. It probably has access to Israeli intelligence reports about what's actually going on. But They probably could, or at least they could give some sensible number beyond what it is. But even just like you could have an academic from Yale or Hopkins School of Public Health or Harvard School of Public Health answer that question literally in 3 weeks with $50,000 if the Israelis would just allow the study to be done, but they won't let these people in. So it's one of those things about our own society that's how little we care about how many people we're killing.
Their humanity. I mean. So we're talking about a death count that could somewhere be in the neighborhood of 100,000. But I want to talk about wounded people. I mean, you're a trauma care person. Mm-hmm. You save somebody's life. You stop them from bleeding to death. Look, if I was shot or got shrapnel in me, not that that's going to happen here. I imagine I'd recover for a long time in a hospital, and then I'd have some kind of home care. And I'm trying to imagine people that kind of come through the hospital and out, and they're people with horrific wounds. Yeah. They've lost limbs, they've lost blood, they are risk of infection, and they're just turned back out into tents.
Correct.
Where they're dropping more bombs. I mean, what is your look? When we hear about famine and lack of aid, what do you think about the patients you treat? About where how and where they're recovering?
Yeah, well,
after they leave?
yeah. So there. How are they recovering? Honestly, a lot of them are not. We very regularly find wounds with maggots in them, like not in the hospital, but people coming in from outside. Although at European, we did find them in the hospital as well, just because it was so overcrowded. But if you walk around in Gaza, I walked between I was at Nasser Medical Complex, and Amal is the Palestine Red Crescent Society's headquarters in Khan Yunis. So I walked between the two. It's maybe like a mile or a mile and a half. And when you're walking around, you see tons and tons of people with amputations, but they still have like cotton dressings on them, and they're just soaked. I mean, like it's just like they're obviously infected. There's no two ways about it, but they're just trying to power through and deal with it, you know. And yeah, I mean, obviously, there's no rehabilitation. There's no one of the things actually that's kind of remarkable. I saw a report from, it might have been Save the Children, I can't remember, but it's very difficult to assist disabled children, but also disabled adults, simply because there are very few flat spaces left in Gaza. Like places where you don't have to where you can lie down, but also where the one part of the floor isn't like this and another is bent and crooked, and like just because everything has been bombed and run over by military vehicles, and it just and a lot, you got also like a lot of these people are living in bombed out homes, like the two walls are missing or the floor is unstable or whatever. So if you have to like climb up a destroyed and slanted roof to get into your second floor apartment because the stairs have been destroyed, and then there's rubble everywhere, like it's just like, yeah, it keeps the rain off of you, but like a lot, again, you actually see this when you're walking around, people actually like picking someone up, putting them on their back, and then trying to ascend up like a mountain of rubble to get into their apartment. It's wild, yeah. But yeah, there's the ability for people to recover from these injuries, because like you were kind of saying, that stopping someone from bleeding to death is the like baseline of medical care. That's not real medical care, right? I mean, you didn't die, great, but like you're not going to recover, you're not going to thrive just because you didn't bleed to death. If your arms are broken and you're blah blah blah, you have a head injury, whatever it might be. The recovery and the rehabilitation and the reconstructive operations are super, super important, and none of that can be done in Gaza right now. Literally none of it.
Well, and you're not a mental health person; you're a trauma surgeon. But what is the mental state, the scale of trauma of the kind of families you're seeing?
Yeah, it's terrible. I'll tell you that almost every I mostly talked to healthcare workers in English, right? Because I don't speak Arabic, so unfortunately. So I mostly talked to physicians and nurses while I was there. I will tell you that with very few exceptions, all of them expect to die. They all expect their families to die. They all expect their children to die. And it's kind of a weird thing to be sitting there like everyone kind of talk, like I'll tell you a story. When I was talking to an anesthesiologist named Nizar, really, really sweet man, goofy, kind of chubby faced guy, you know. He's a nice guy, and his family lives east of European hospital, so now they must have been evacuated from their village. He has five, five or six, I can't remember. Anyway, 5 boys. And I was just having coffee with him. It was Ramadan, so people stay up late having coffee and stuff like that. So I was having coffee with him, and everyone just banters back and forth. It's just casual conversation. And at some point, he starts telling me, he's kind of making fun of his wife. He's, my wife, she just can't do anything for herself. She can't go to the market by herself. She can't discipline the boys by herself. Blah 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 blah. And then he goes, "When I'm martyred, I don't know what she's going to do." And I can still remember, we're kind of sitting across the table. He had his little cup of coffee, little Arabic coffee cup, and he's got his big belly, and he's sitting there with his hands like this. And then, sometimes you say something that you don't expect is going to kind of trigger an emotional response in you. And he kind of looked down at the table, and his voice started to quiver, and he just said, what is this? What kind of life is this now? And that kind of resignation to a fate that's just awful is extremely widespread. You see it like actually I forget if it's Save the Children or somebody else, but maybe it was UNICEF. Well, one of these children's groups found that about 50% of children, small children, not 17 and a half year old boys, but small children in Gaza are actively suicidal. That's extremely unusual. I actually remember at European Hospital, it was shocking to me how many kids regularly said, and again, this is all through translators because I can't understand it, but how many kids regularly said, why couldn't I have died with Sarah my sister, when she died? Why couldn't I have died with mom? Why do I have to be the only one that's alive? Why do I have to feel my leg hurting so bad? Like, this was very common, and it is extremely unusual. Like, have you ever met a suicidal 5-year-old? It's not
No.
outside of extreme psychiatric disease. That is not common at all.
Yeah.
Even in other war zones, you know what I mean? Like that, it's not.
Yeah.
It is not. That is not a well described response for children. But you can. I'll tell you another story just about their mental state. There was I met a cardiologist I can't remember his name now, but he has four children, excuse me, one small girl who's 4 or 5 years old. They live in Rafah, and this was during ceasefire time. They live in Rafah, and there are Israeli sniper towers now in the Philadelphia corridor, the border between Gaza and Egypt, and one of those towers was firing into Rafah, and some of the bullets came into their home or their apartment. So the whole family hit the deck. But the 4 or 5 year old girl who, if you think about it, her only conscious memories are from this war, right? Like that's all she can remember. She was just dancing around in a circle, like singing to herself. Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
And they were like, I don't remember her name, but Sarah, what are you doing? What are you doing? Come here, come here. And she, no, don't worry, mommy. The bullets are all the way up there. Look, because they were hitting above so these parents had to bear crawl over to their child and tackle her to try and keep her safe. It's kind of like a kid walking out into traffic, but the traffic is bullets. But what this kind of prolonged and really dramatic, extensive experience with death and misery and starvation and hunger and lack of cleanliness and displacement and fear, like seeing your parents afraid all the time, what that is going to do, what that's going to do to the half of Gaza that is children is not clear. Yeah. But it's already having a dramatic and very noticeable effect.
Well, I want to ask you one kind of political question. I'm going to ask it this way. You're American, as you said, and so you represent America in your own way, like you're in Gaza as an American, providing this assistance, and you know that the bombs that are being dropped on the people you care are American bombs. Yeah. What is it like to be an American in this place, treating people whose wounds are almost entirely with American-made weapons? Yeah,
it's weird. I'll tell you 2 stories about that. So the first one was on March 18th. That's when the widespread bombing resumed. 2:30 in the morning, the bombs go off. The door to our living quarters was blown open and smashed into the cabinet behind it. That kind of woke us all up. We're like, holy crap. So we ran down to the ER and started working. The first 2 kids that I saw were dead. So they were on their way to dying. But the first one that we could save, she turned out to be a 5-year-old girl named Sham. And Sham had injuries to her left chest and her belly. It turned out that her spleen was bleeding and her left lung was torn. But she also had a wound to her the left side of her face that had traveled through the left side of her. It was a piece of shrapnel that had traveled through the left side of her brain, but it stayed on that side, so it's a recoverable injury. Actually, she did quite well from that standpoint. She didn't talk after she left the hospital, I think 2 or 3 weeks later, but she didn't, after like 6 or 7 days, she started talking again and using the right side of her body again. But anyway, I still remember because, we're looking, it's just a room full of kids lying on and there were adults too, but mostly full of kids lying on the ground. And you're just trying to pick out which one should I start with? These are triage decisions. There's a way of doing them, but it's still pretty overwhelming at the time. But so I find this little girl and I look at her and she's not breathing properly. So I do a jaw thrust. Like if you've ever done a CPR class, they teach you, you just pull the jaw forward. That lets somebody's, because they're kind of obstructing their own airway by doing that. And all these kids are lying on the ground and kids have big heads. They're just getting pushed down like that. But anyway, so I jaw thrust her and she starts breathing again. So, oh, good. Okay, this is one we might actually be able to save. So I tell the nurses, like, get ready to let's intubate this girl. It's just stuff we have to do. So I just have to stand there holding her jaw up for 3, 4, or 5 minutes, something like that, while they're getting set up to do the stuff we need to do and trying to make space and things like that. And I still remember while I was looking at her. And I'm just looking at this wound bleeding on her face. It's not bleeding badly, but I'm just looking at it. And I remember thinking, like, did I pay for this shrapnel, or did my neighbor, or did their neighbor? Like, it's weird. Like, it's kind of wild, I mean, it's not like nobody wants shrapnel to be in this little girl's brain. Like, literally no one. Yet we're doing it. It's just very odd. So that was one thing. But the other was that the last operation I did on March 18th was in a kid named Ibrahim Barhoum. He was a 16-year-old boy, and on March 23rd, he was ready to go home. He had injuries to his colon and his rectum from shrapnel, so we repaired them and we gave him a colostomy where the colon's coming out to the skin. And he's 16. Most 16-year-olds would be pretty pissed off about this, but he was pretty chill about it, actually. He was a nice kid. And on the 23rd, it was the evening, and that day, he had done pretty well that day. Now he was eating, he was walking around, like his gut was starting to function, in other words. So I was like, okay, he can go home the next day, great. So at I don't know, probably 8:30 or 9 at night, I went. We used to live on the 4th floor of the hospital, and the surgical ward, the men's surgical ward, was on the 2nd floor. So I left our little living quarters after iftar, the evening meal in Ramadan, and went to. So I'm walking to the stairs. And I walked past the ICU on the 4th floor, and there was a doctor, I think her name was Hanib. She grabbed me and she was like, Feroz, there's a kid named Mohammed that was transferred over here from another hospital, and he's bleeding to death. Like, he needs to go to the operating room. So I took a look at him. That took about 10 minutes, and he was bleeding. So I just told them, look, you guys get the operating room going. I'm going to go change Ibrahim's bandages, talk to his family about how to take care of this colostomy, and because he's going to go home the next morning, and then I'm going to come back up here and we'll take care of this kid's case. And like literally as I walked out of the ICU, Ibrahim's room exploded. The Israelis fired a missile at it's probably a drone fired missile, but who knows, at the room, killing Ismail Barhoum, who they said was the prime minister of Gaza, and Ibrahim, because they're distant cousins and they had the same last name, so the nurses had put them into the same room just to make family visits and stuff easier, and was killed as well. And so the whole hospital went on lockdown. Actually, I actually didn't even realize that the bomb had hit the hospital. It just felt like all the other ones. But the Palestinians somehow knew right away. So they grabbed us and put us in, the foreigners, and put us in the safer corner of the hospital, they thought. But after about an hour, the administration lifted the lockdown of the hospital because they don't know if are we going to get invaded? Is there going to be another bombing? Who knows? They lifted it after about an hour. So I ran down to the ER to see if there was anybody that needed to come up for an operation, because this kid Mohammed still needed to go to the OR. And when I was down there, 3 or 4 guys ran down with a body in a sheet, because you couldn't evaluate people in the blown up ward. It was just a disaster. So they ran down the stairs with the body, and so I said, no, go to the trauma bay. So I followed them in, and when I pulled the sheet off, I recognized Ibrahim's abdomen. He had been eviscerated. The sutures were torn open. His bowel was outside. His colostomy was torn, but I recognized him from his abdomen. Shit, this 16-year-old boy who I should have just sent him home that day, instead of waiting. But that kind of thing, it's it does weigh. It weighs on you a little bit, but it's more just you know how senseless all of this is. It's not making anyone safer. It's not doing anything to help anyone. Yet we're all just sleepwalking into doing it.
Well, there's a book. The last question I'm going to ask. There's a book called Dispatches by a great Vietnam War correspondent, and he describes, I think it's Michael Herr, coming back to New York, and he's just been in Vietnam for a year, and he's at a bar or something, and he wants to stand up on the table and shout at everybody what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
Do you know what's going on there? I mean, do you feel that way? You're back in California, it's sunny outside, and people are walking around, and meanwhile we're paying for this.
Yeah. Do I wish people would pay attention more? Yeah.
I mean, I guess
for
you're
sure.
doing that.
You're right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think if I have never talked to my chairman at where I work is a fairly right wing guy, Trump voter, evangelical Christian guy. He's a very decent human being in his day to day life, but he and my politics would not line up at all. But very good. He's our chairman. He's a great guy to work for. But when I went to Gaza. The first time he was like, "Oh, just be careful." He's kind of implying that like these Muslims are crazy. You got to watch out. When I came back though, he came to a presentation that I did at the hospital just for like our little local research day about Gaza, and when I just showed the people I treated and what I saw, and afterwards he was like, "Feroz, I had no idea this stuff. This is awful. Like this is crazy." And he was like, "I always thought we were the good guys and the Israelis were the good guys. It's the radical Islamic blah blah blah. It would all of it. Not that Al Qaeda's good, but or even like not that Hamas is like a bunch of great nice people, but he as soon as he saw what was actually going on." It was totally untenable for him to continue to support. He just couldn't. And the vast majority, I think with like maybe one exception of normal human beings that I've talked to, and other people, not people who have some partisan interest, but just normal people, are just appalled by this. They just can't understand it. What the hell? Why on earth are we doing this? And so, but that's the reason that so much of this is hidden. You know what I mean? Like that's the reason
there's no press in there. Nobody,
nobody's allowed to see what you saw. Exactly. No one who is a truly objective observer is allowed to go. And like the only people who are allowed to go are they're embedded with the Israeli military. A lot of them are just kind of weird. Like kind of neoconservative, odd, strange people. The few reporters that do go in with the Israeli military and are serious actually still come out with shocking stories. Like I don't know if you remember, there was a CNN reporter who went in and saw the Israelis destroying a cemetery, and so he asked him, "Why are you? How could that have any military?" "Oh, well, there's a tunnel right underneath." He said, "Oh, can you show?" No, it's too dangerous. Please show it to me. So they did. And just by simple aerial footage and geolocation, it's pretty easy to see that they were not under the cemetery at all. They were just destroying the cemetery to destroy a cemetery, to humiliate people, to, obliterate their cultural heritage, to, make people really feel like we don't belong here. It's not, we have to leave, in other words. There's nothing left to stay for. And so it's just so I think people want to. I've never lost my faith that people at their core are decent. Yes, we have maybe somebody has this or that view of abortion, or so we can talk about stuff all day long, no problem. But at their core, nobody is in favor of blowing up children. At their core, no one is in favor of making an entire society homeless. Nobody is in favor of obliterating hospitals, of killing a 16-year-old boy in his hospital bed. No one's in favor of this stuff. So that's why, yes, do I want to scream at everybody? Yeah, for sure. But I also recognize that the reason they're not screaming themselves is because they don't know what's going on. Right. And if they did, they'd be appalled by it. And so that's why I try to get out.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Well, look,
very
thanks
powerful
so much
stuff.